Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another vBrownBag. Tonight, we're going to pick up where we left off a couple weeks ago with VMware Cloud Foundation, dive a bit more into the architecture of the product, and then we're going to hear a bit about what's new with VCF 4.0. Before we get rolling, though, a couple of housekeeping notes. This is an interactive podcast. We want you to get in on the discussion. So if you're watching live, please use the Zoom Q&A. And if you prefer Twitter, make sure to use the hashtag vBrownBag. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome and thank you. Make sure you check out the rest of our series on VCF and other recent vBrownBags on vBrownBag on YouTube. If you can't get enough of your fix of vBrownBag once a week by joining us on Wednesdays at 7:30 Central, check out these other times we've got listed here on the right side for all of our shows worldwide. I am your host, Ken Nalbone, and joining me today are Kevin Tebear and Heath Johnson from VMware to cover VMware Cloud Foundation. Fellas, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you now.
All right, just want to confirm you can see that?
Sure can.
Awesome. All right, so just to get started, I'm Kevin Tebear. Here I have a better bio slide here. So I'm, been at VMware now for about 6 years, 3 years in what we call the HCI business unit. Joining me is Heath Johnson. I don't have his slide, but Heath, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Heath Johnson. I'm not too far from Kevin. We're a few miles apart from each other, and part of the same business unit here at VMware, concentrating on VMware Cloud Foundation.
Excellent. Thanks, Heath. All right, so let's get started here. So the agenda that we're going to cover today is a bit of the architecture, some of the networking, lifecycle management, and vSphere with Kubernetes, as well as multi-site and multi-instance, and how that applies to VCF. So diving in with architecture, as we've seen a couple weeks ago, we have a new build of materials that ships with VCF 4. So namely, we're shipping vSphere 7 and NSX-T3. Those are the two main components here, along with vSAN 7.0. On the right-hand side, we see the supported software that works with SDDC Manager, namely, vRealize Suite 8.1 and the Workspace ONE Access, or the artist formerly known as VIDM. Moving on. So I think we covered this a couple weeks ago, but if not, this is a change in the architecture, right? So now that we have a simplified architecture with embedded PSCs, the PSCs are embedded into the vCenter. That was always a point that customers brought up to us historically. With the change to embedded PSCs, when a workload domain has been created, what we're doing is actually maintaining the ring topology, right? So as workload domain 1 gets added, the PSC is added to the ring topology all the way out to workload domain 4 here. If any one of the workload domains were to need to be removed, the ring topology would then again be updated to show or to reflect that that workload domain has been removed, and remove it from an authentication point. So SDDC Manager authenticates against the SSO domain. So your administrator at vSphere.local account authenticates you into SDDC Manager, thereby giving you access to any of the vCenters once you're authenticated.
And does it have to be that administrator at vSphere.local, or can it be any account that has those types of privileges if you're tied into Active Directory, for example?
Sure, yeah, we support any vSphere.local or whatever you choose as your SSO domain. You can give those rights directly from within SDDC Manager, or if you choose to join your vCenters to an Active Directory domain, we can provide authentication all the way down to an AD user for either administrator rights or just operator rights inside of SDDC Manager.
Cool.
So as we build out, and a couple of weeks ago, Heath did an overview of what a workload domain is, so I won't necessarily spend the time there, but we're going to take a look and see how this gets built out, right? So first we start with our management workload domain, which has its own NSX instance. Then we have our management domain vCenter and a pair of NSX edges. That is to enable application virtual networks. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but this is what the core components look like deployed. Then as you build out your infrastructure, you end up with an additional NSX instance and an additional workload domain vCenter. Of course, you can run your apps inside of this workload domain, or you can, scale it out to be with an additional cluster. Or you can deploy additional workload domains, so workload domain 2 and 3 here. Now, as I built that out, we could see one thing, which is in the center column, we have workload domain 1 vCenter tied to a specific NSX instance. But then we also have workload domain 2 and 3 that are also sharing an additional NSX instance. So after your management domain is deployed, you have the option to either create a new NSX instance or join an existing NSX instance. Anytime that you scale to an additional workload domain, you will be required for one NSX instance in addition to what is deployed for the management domain. And of course, all these workload domains are purpose-built, right? We look at this as purpose-built infrastructure made for a particular type, whether that be when I was in, from a customer perspective, looking at this as how do I separate my Linux or Windows licensing, or how do I separate my Oracle licensing to a specific place? That is one way that you could definitely do it. Otherwise, they could be purpose-built for, modern apps workload domain that we see up on the top, enabling that for vSphere with Kubernetes, or maybe even deploying a Horizon workload domain that we see down here in blue.
All right, so we've got one question, kind of on the architecture a little bit. So he's asking, what sort of scale does this become useful for some sort of value, right? So I think the kind of question is, can small medium businesses use this? So maybe talk a little bit about the consolidated architecture.
Yeah, so a company that is like an SMB type company, they may only deploy a management workload domain. And I actually hid the slides on consolidated architecture, but can definitely bring those back up. The management domain, everyone starts with a management domain. That management domain can be scaled out to multiple clusters, right? There's actually no need to deploy additional workload domains. And, to that question of are SMBs using it? Absolutely. Customers that want to get out of the infrastructure business and they just want, one button to click, that is highly successful for us in the SMB space, especially for those customers that, hey, I want infrastructure. I want you to do the lifecycle management. I don't want to have to get into the weeds on some of these things. Give me a design so that way I'm not working with somebody to create a design for me. I'll go with your design because it's one less thing that I need to worry about. So good question. Heath, does that cover the answers there?
Yeah, I think so far.
Okay, perfect. We will move on. So I talked a little bit about the networking components here, about how you can have separate NSX instances or dedicated NSX instances. So as we, build that out, it also becomes a question about how many NICs can we support? And the answer to that is, hey, we could support up to 6 physical NICs in a VCF environment. This is all done through the VCF API. And we could see here that we have 3 VDSs. If you know a little bit about NSXT, historically they had something called the NVDS. Well, in vSphere 7, they have what's called the converged VDS. So we allow you to deploy up to 3 of the converged VDSs, have different uplinks attached to those with a single transport zone through NSX. This is just a outlay of, you know, what the art of the possible is with VCF. So with that deployment model, and this should look very familiar, we have the ability to deploy NSX edges automated through SDDC Manager, either on day 0. In the management domain, we see that pair of NSX edges. Definitely a best practice to have the NSX edges deployed during bring up. However, if you are unable to fulfill the requirement of BGP and need to use static for some reason for a routing protocol, we can definitely skip the NSX edge deployment during bring up and do that as a day X action for the management domain or for any workload domain. So we can go ahead and deploy NSX edges purpose built for vSphere with Kubernetes, or deploy them on a per cluster level for workload domain 2 and 3 here. This is all done through a gated type form, so to speak. So in the instance of vSphere with Kubernetes, you need a large NSX edge. Reason for that is because you need load balancing to happen behind there. So if you go ahead and select what is called a profile when you deploy a NSX edge, you have the option of picking a profile that is made for workload management or vSphere with Kubernetes. So that way you're getting and not having to toggle, you know, what are the correct settings that I need to use. We're able to just say, hey, I want to use this for workload management. Go ahead and select that. It's automatically going to give you a active pair of NSX edges deployed in a large format for the use case of vSphere with Kubernetes. So really some time savings there. So as we continue on, some of the new lifecycle management capabilities. Now, all of these aren't necessarily new. We'll get to one that is in a little bit here. So the common ask from our customers is, I need a way to manage my infrastructure. One of those being is, how do I look at all the patches that are released and updates over time? Where are the dependencies, and where is my yellow brick road from that aspect of which way do I need to apply my updates to ensure that I'm always staying in a consistent patch state? And the answer to that really is SDDC Manager's lifecycle management capabilities masks the dependencies. Through SDDC Manager, we're downloading the updates and applying the updates in the correct order so that you're always compliant to the HCL. Now, I see that there's a question that came in. Since VCF is available on vMug Advantage, is there a lab guide or something for showing how to use that? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. We have what is called VLC, or VMware Lab Constructor. Ken, I think you have a session coming up on that in a couple of weeks.
And not just me, but Heath as well. So on May 20th, we will be covering just VCF Lab Constructor.
Perfect. That's absolutely a great way to get started. Heath and I both use it on a daily basis to build our home labs out to support nested VCF deployments and be able to we'll say kick the tires on some of this stuff in a non-production environment. So a great use case there. Continuing on through lifecycle management, we have the ability to deploy updates on a per cluster basis. And with that, the update is released by VMware. The update notification comes into your SDDC manager. You're able to then, review those updates and choose whether or not you want to download them right now, or you want to, maybe schedule that update for today, tomorrow, or up to 364 days in the future. If you're buying VCF, I would apply your updates a little bit sooner, seeing as how we make it easy for you. Then with the monitoring and reporting, being able to go into the updates history, take a look at all those updates that have been applied, and be able to pull dedicated log reports for each one of those updates, right from the UI. So just a quick walkthrough of what lifecycle management looks like in SDDC Manager. So as I mentioned, you get that notification. So in this case, an update has already been downloaded. Under the updates and patches, we see that there is one update that's available. Now I can choose to schedule that update or update now or run a pre-check. So scrolling down a little bit more, I can see the current details of every piece of software that's deployed in this workload domain. I can see my specific patch version on my vCenter, PSCs, LCM appliance portion of my SDDC manager, my ESXi hosts in the bottom left there, or my NSX components in the bottom right. Now I can take a look at the details of that patch that I'm about to deploy. And we can see that I'm going to take my PSC, or my vCenter in this case, from build number 881 to build number 906. And of course, there's some appending digits to those, but I'm not having to go and look up and see if this is compatible or any of those things, right? I'm delivered a software update that I can just quickly act and deploy those. I can see that my resource changes up here at the top are going to be PSC2, PSC1, and vCenter1 are all going to be impacted by this. They're all going to go from version X to version Y. So once I've confirmed those details, I can come back and let's do a pre-check. So what a pre-check does is validate, is my vSAN healthy? Is my NSX instance healthy? Is vCenter healthy? Basically exposing any issues that may be that may inhibit you from actually running that update in your environment. Which is great because when I was a customer, many times you would be halfway through deploying updates and you would hit something that could have been caught ahead of time. I foolishly admit that I have updated my vCenter before my PSC on countless times when I've done this in the home lab, and nothing makes you get on the edge of your seat more than when you log into vCenter again and your inventory is gone until you update your PSC. So just a little, personal story there of, ways that I have found it incredibly helpful. So as I look at that pre-check, right, I see that now I can schedule that update or hit update now. If I hit update now, it's going to automatically schedule it for 2 minutes in the future. If I schedule the update, like I said, I can schedule that anywhere from immediately or up to 364 days in the future. I clicked update now. I said, let's just go ahead and update that now. And then in the bottom here, I can see that my PSC1 is in progress of that update. If I had another administrator that happened to log into SDDC Manager to create infrastructure, manage something, decommission something, they could see that I have an update that's running, which will actually lock the system. So that way there's no catastrophic failures in the middle of running these updates. Clicking back in, seeing the update in progress here, I can see that my PSC1 has updated successfully, PSC2 is updating successfully, and I can see that, up at the top here, that 2 or 3 of the resources have been updated. Once the update is complete, I get a update has been successful marker here on the screen, showing that the update has been successful on all three of those resources, allowing me to proceed on with potentially an ESXi update that would come next. So speaking of ESXi and what's new with vSphere 7, they've come up with something called VLCM. Take a look at this as basically a VUM 2.0 or VUM on steroids, or vSphere Update Manager on steroids. So what VLCM does is it allows you to do BIOS firmware patching from Dell, HP right now, and be able to, look at, is there drivers or firmware that I should be running if I'm running vSAN? So what I'm able to do with that is I'm able to create an image that's applied at a cluster level. That image contains my BIOS, firmware, VIBs, etc., things that is no fun to maintain, but it has to be done in a separate cycle right now. And I'm going to build an image and apply that across a cluster. When it comes time for a patch to happen, we can see in the bottom left here that this is all managed by SDDC Manager. You take that image, import it to SDDC Manager, and then apply it at the time that you're creating your workload domains. I can see that, hey, there's a potential issue here. I need to remediate that drift. There may be a new firmware version available. There may be a new ESXi version available. It goes in, remediates a drift, and brings it back to a healthy state. So with that, moving on to vSphere with Kubernetes. So we look at VCF as really the fastest way to deliver developer-ready infrastructure. With SDDC Manager, you're able to create all your infrastructure, your workload domains, deploy NSX in a appropriate way, deploy your NSX edge clusters, enable vSphere with Kubernetes, and then at the end of the day, lifecycle the software stack. Lifecycle management is hard. It's even harder when your developers are running that infrastructure. So being able to lifecycle that environment, the vSphere admin doesn't need any specialized knowledge of containers or vSphere with Kubernetes. They basically just see the pods being created right alongside the VMs being created. And they're able to manage everything from a vSphere perspective. This is, the fastest way to get up and running with vSphere with Kubernetes. And Ken, I highly recommend, having a dedicated episode just on enabling vSphere with Kubernetes with VCF. So.
Oh, we absolutely need one. You wouldn't happen to know anybody that could help us out with that, would you?
I know a couple people.
Well, good. Then we can talk offline. Graham says, yes, please, by the way.
Excellent. Well, we will get you hooked up with them.
Yeah, well, voluntold somebody else to come online and do that.
It's the circle of life.
It is.
All right, moving on here. So multi-site architectures get a little bit interesting in VCF. So we have basically three different deployment models today. One is VCF in a single site deployment, which of course is what any single data center would be able to do. And then there's VCF with stretch cluster deployment, obviously stretched vSAN workload domains between two sites. And then a third site would need to be available for the witness VM. Then the third model is multi-instance management. And I'll cover multi-instance management in a little bit here. But what multi-instance management allows you to do is take deployment model number one here with a single site deployment. Maybe you have something that exceeds the thresholds of what would be considered applicable for a stretch deployment. I think that's like 5 milliseconds of latency and 10 gigs of bandwidth. So if you're unable to fulfill those requirements, you're able to deploy another instance of VCF at a secondary or tertiary site. And then through SDDC Manager, you can perform what's called federation and allow from any single VCF instance the ability to see, read-only view of all of your infrastructure. That is VCF infrastructure, and we'll see that in just a little bit here. So first, let's talk about stretch cluster deployments, right? So we start with Site A. And of course, with Site A, we have our management domain. We have a VI workload domains, a couple of them here. But we want to add some level of resiliency to our environment outside of a single availability zone and add a second availability zone. So what we do is we purchase some hardware, we get it racked and stacked at the secondary site. First, we need to make sure that that witness is deployed. So we see that in the top middle there. And then we go ahead and we stretch our management domain. So by stretching our management domain, now our NSX managers that are deployed there for all of our workload domains have a high level of resiliency between those sites. Our vCenter servers that are deployed there also have a high level of resiliency. So that way, if site A were to be lost, at least all of our vCenters and NSX managers, et cetera, would move over to site B and still be able to function without an issue. So once our management domain has been stretched, we can go ahead and stretch additional workload domains. If we decide that what I'll call workload domain 3, or the one in the middle on the left, we decided that one we didn't want any resiliency for. Maybe that was a VDI pool, and in the case they're going to just deploy another VDI workload domain in availability zone 2, just so that way they could fail over in other ways. Or maybe they want to deploy vSphere with Kubernetes enabled workload domain just in availability zone 2. This is all a capability when you have that stretched cluster availability between those sites. Now, when you don't have the availability of stretched cluster between sites, this is the multi-instance management capability, right? So being able to take your VCF federation members, there's 2 roles. There's controllers and then there's members. You can have up to 3 controllers that maintain access or read-write access to what's called a Kafka database. Those share that role. However, your members can be joined to the VCF federation. And as we dig in a little bit more here, we can see that this is a screenshot of federation from a VCF perspective. We can see our dots on the map where my VCF instances have been deployed. And in addition to that, I can see that and the latency and bandwidth requirements are almost nothing. I'm able to operate in a federated model like this with less than a mega bandwidth and less than or greater than 2 seconds of latency between my sites. So when stretch cluster isn't an option, this is definitely an option to be able to bring buzzword bingo, single pane of glass visibility across all of your sites and locations, even when it exceeds SSO domain limitations of 150 milliseconds. So as we build that out, we take our first site, our New York site that is the controller, and then we could add Chicago and San Francisco as federation members, or we can build out, I think it's up to 10 sites for members and controllers to be joined to. So that is what I had for tonight in terms of overview, what's new, and what's new with VCF4. Ken, did you have some questions or?
There are no outstanding questions right now. I'll just say, you told your story about updating your vCenter before your PSCs. I personally can't relate to that. I've never ever updated anything out of cycle or anything like that. I certainly have never failed to plan in my entire career, and I think I can speak for everybody in the audience and say they never have done that either. Just kidding, of course.
That never happens, right?
Right? Yeah. I'm going to pause for a moment, see if there are any other questions from the audience. But if not, we'll give you back a little bit of your evening, and I'll say thank you to Kevin for presenting and Heath for fielding some of the questions during our presentation tonight. All right, I'm not seeing any others, so I'm going to say good night and thanks everybody. Join us next week. We are going to be talking about what's new with VRNI with Matt Just. Good night, everybody.